name. Could I have a little more volume? Their graphic hopes and predictions and terrors have been passed on and misunderstood and misused in every generation since. Many thought the world was coming to an end in 1944, and that the Antichrist was, wait for it, Franklin Roosevelt. How else could he have been elected 4 times? Some people actually believe that. Crazier still is the idiocy currently spreading among our dear Christian zealot fundamentalists today that COVID vaccine is the mark of the beast. Google that, you will be inundated. If you are vaccinated, many warn, you will never be saved. Most evangelical preachers, to their credit, are trying to quash that nonsense, but it is popping up everywhere right now. Even wackier, I read this week that in a recent poll, 28% of the GOP believe that our former president will be reinstated as president before the end of this year. That is magical thinking on stilts. How it could possibly happen, I don't know, but that's a lot of people. Now, most of these zealots reading the Bible, the apocalyptic literature that I'm talking about right here, and reading it literally, long for the return of Jesus in the sky, fine, and believe that a new temple will soon be built on the exact spot as the first century temple, the one leveled by the Romans in 70 AD. They believe, in fact, that several key events have already taken place, including the reinstatement of the nation of Israel in 1948, that are preceding the end of the world. The rebuilt temple, they say, will be the capstone that will immediately usher in a new age and the return of Jesus. The problem, of course, is that there's a building on the spot today, a very significant building. It's called the Dome of the Rock, and it's Islam's 3rd most sacred space. So removing that would cause a very big stir. I went to Israel in 1999, and the people going through the checkpoint that leads to the temple ground, we all had to go through, who were most closely questioned were we Americans, not any Muslim or anybody like it was the Americans. The Israeli soldiers in charge of that crossing were terrified that some crazy American fundamentalist was going to strap dynamite to his body and try to blow up the dome and in some wacky way force God to bring about a swift end to the world. So I got a thorough pat down, and so did every other minister I was traveling with. Well, there are hundreds of thousands of Christian fundamentalists who drool over the prospect of the end of the world. And if you read their websites, as I do from time to time, you can see that for many of them, it cannot come too soon. Maybe you have read Tara Westover's wonderful best-selling book called Educated. Tara grew up in an Idaho fundamentalist survivalist household. Fundamentalist survivalist, that's really wild. In which her father lectured the family on being ready for the last days over every meal that they had together. Tara said she'd never seen him so excited in her life as when he was anticipating the coming of Y2K. Remember that back in 1999? She said he was never so disappointed as he was on the 1st of January 2000 when nothing, absolutely nothing happened as a result. Some people just have an appetite for extreme catastrophe. The Reverend Joanna Adams tells about seeing a sign in front of a bait shop on a country road in Georgia. Smile, it said. Our God is a consuming fire. That is just not a thought that puts a smile on my face, she said. A news reporter once called me in anticipation of some Christian fundamentalist end of the world prediction, I can't remember what it was, that was making the rounds at the time. And he asked me if the church I was pastoring was going to have an end of the world observance. The man was clearly looking for something juicy and was so disappointed when I told him we weren't into that kind of thing, that we Presbyterians were more concerned, about how to live faithfully into the future. We weren't nearly as newsworthy as religious zealots, longing for an impending end. Well, there is, of course, another way of looking at the future that is, in fact, genuinely at the heart of our faith tradition. And let me read again from this morning's text from the prophet Isaiah, a letter written to a community of captive exiles in Babylon 2,400 years ago. Comfort, comfort my people, says our God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem, get you to a high mountain, lift up your voices with strength. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. And those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. These words are meant to offer comfort, not panic. They're written to a community of people who had run out of options for the future and had given up hope, and their situation could not have been more dire. They had no army, their capital was in ruins, their leaders were either slaughtered or exiled, their temple had been leveled, and they themselves were being held captive in a foreign land, in a ghetto. One can easily imagine those people spending time longing for the good old days, for how they imagined it used to be in Jerusalem when Solomon was king and their army was feared and when there was food enough for everybody and their temple, the glory of Israel stood bright and gleaming in the sun. Now imagine how those people felt when the prophet, after he wrote words of comfort and tenderness, delivered these words. Knock it off. Knock off the nostalgia. Do not remember the former things or consider those old stories about those chariots and the people crossing the Red Sea. For God is about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Are you blind? Do you not perceive it? The full text says, yes, the God of the Hebrews did make a safe path through the waters of the Red Sea for the escaping people during the Exodus. And yes, God did kill the Egyptian soldiers who pursued them, drowning the lot of them. But look, God is creating a new path, a way out of exile in Babylon. This event is a gift to a whole new generation and is meant to enhance the lives, not just of those who read these words, but their children and grandchildren too. So there is in those words, in that text, a very important faith affirmation that when our resources are depleted, God's are not. When we've used up all our options, God has more options. When we've given into hopelessness and think, everything's going off the rails, God is busy coming up with new possibilities and new hope, a new creation, a new future. Faith in this way of thinking is not looking backward, but forward. Not sitting around the fire telling stories about how wonderful the 1950s were with Leave It to Beaver and I Love Lucy and 19-cent gasoline and how bad the present is. So isn't it time for God to usher in a horrific end to the history and, rapture us all away? No. Remember, the 50s also had polio epidemics and the fear of atomic war every day. No, faith is about being bullish about the future. It's about getting ready to join God in the ongoing drama of creation right here on planet Earth. It's about taking on the challenges of human-made problems like nuclear proliferation and climate change. There is, in these words, a new way of honoring the past by remembering that God's promise has always been about the future. Allow me to repeat something I said, I think, in a sermon a few months ago from the British theologian John Taylor. He said there are two ways of looking at time. Is the source of time behind us, pushing us from history into the future? Or is the source of time ahead of us, pulling us out of history into a new future so that the present always has within it the seeds of hope for something new? It says that no matter how rich are our memories of the past, regardless of the comfort memories give us, in the future lay wonderful possibilities. In the future lies a chance for us to co-create with God a world that is better than any that has come before. So it calls us to take a long look at things. That the world, in fact, is a better place than it was 1,000 years ago when life was said to be ugly, brutish, and short. Even 100 years ago. It's certainly a better place for women and children, even though there are forces that threaten the advances that have been made to champion the rights of women and children. Because history always moves in zigzag fashion. So knowing this, we move forward, hopefully, but also cautiously, knowing the forces that are against it. Listen to these words on caution and hope on the occasion of a wedding from a woman named Judy from Big Sur. I'm standing at the altar yet again, getting ready to make another promise to love someone to the end. And I do love this man, but can I really promise to love him forever? The music stops, and I ask him in a whisper if we can just promise to do our best and ask for compassion if we can't. If we can just say there are no guarantees and that life may come in and interfere, if we can just say, "My God, I love you today," and hope that we can say it tomorrow and the next day and the next. I fully intend to love him forever. But what if I'm not helping him have the best possible life somewhere down the line? I want to give him the gift of not promising. He smiles and whispers back, "My God, I love you today." So, we will celebrate a birth in 5 more weeks, the birth of a child who we traditionally call the light of the world. And here in November 2021, the hope in that light, though flickering because of all the craziness going on, still shines. Still shines. And while the darkness of malice and gross ignorance that I've outlined and is way worse than we can imagine, while all that threatens, it still has not overcome that basic light and hope. I mean, who knows what threats from North Korea or Russia or domestic terrorists within our borders or quickly melting glaciers hold for us. We're not to take anything for granted, but we are instead to live intentionally, knowing that life is difficult and that people who call themselves Christians are often deluded and are easily seduced by Cassandras and fear-mongers who misread the Bible to all of our expense. So let me end with an alternative understanding of the gospel that might best help in such crazy times. It's offered by David Roche. Now, David Roche was a broken man one time. He was in fact born broken, born with a severe facial deformity. I learned about him reading Anne Lamott's wonderful book, Plan B, and she is a huge fan of David. Like Anne, he's a total hoot. And when he speaks before groups, he calls himself the pastor, self-ordained pastor of the Church of 80% Sincerity. And here's how he describes it. He says, "We in the Church of 80% Sincerity aren't big on miracles, but we do believe that you have to stay alert because good things happen. I will do a new thing, says the Lord. When God opens the door, he says, you've got to put your foot in. 80% is about as good as it's going to get. So 20% of the time, think of it this way, you just get to be yourself." David's gospel, says Anne, is so subversive, so contrary to everything society leads us to believe, that if you look good, you'll be happy and have it all together, and you'll be successful and nothing will go wrong, and you won't have to die, and the rot will never get in. When David insists you are fine exactly the way you are, no matter what cards the world has dealt you, you find yourself almost believing him. When he talks about unconditional love, he gives you a new lease on life because the way he explains it, you may for the first time believe that even you could taste of this. As he explains it, in the Church of 80% Sincerity, everyone has to come to understand that unconditional love is a reality, but it only has a shelf life of about 8 to 10 seconds. So instead of beating yourself up because you feel it only fleetingly, you should savor those moments when it appears. As David puts it, we might say to our beloved, "Honey, I am having these feelings of unconditional love for you for the last 8 to 10 seconds. Or, alternatively, you could say, "Darling, I'll love you till the very end of dinner." The future, the late Peter Gomes asserts, is a blessing of God. The future is God's time. That has enormous implications for how we live, and it has deep and powerful implications for you and me personally. Our future, our time, the time we have left to live, whatever that happens to be, is time inhabited by a purposeful God, so that wherever we go, God will be there. Whatever happens to us, God will be with us and has an eye on the future. Amen. We'll now